Yeah, my name is Carrington George Moore. I am the executive director of Common Cathedral. I've been in this role for the past 9 months, and I've enjoyed myself. I from Youngstown, Ohio. It's an old Rust Belt city in northeastern Ohio.
Hmm.
I studied political science and philosophy in undergrad, and then came to Boston University School of Theology back in 2010 to study theology. Got my master's in divinity, and yeah, that's kind of where my story in terms of doing nonprofit leadership in the city of Boston really started. One of the first spaces that I got a chance to visit was something called the Boston City Mission.
Hmm.
A City Mission, they actually do work around supporting the unhoused persons of Boston. And so that was a really pivotal experience for me. I was about 23 years of age in graduate school when I experienced that. And so that was really a beautiful kind of moment for me to really kind of understand the dynamics of the social economic kind of differences, the stratification of wealth that happens in a very affluent city like Boston.
Hmm.
And so really began to kind of think about theology does a good job, particularly at Boston University, the School of Theology. They did a great job of giving you the language to equip you with talking about the issue. But most seminaries across the country don't necessarily always equip you with the tangible skills of how to like kind of manifest justice and equity in the world. And so
Right.
being able to talk about it is very different from being able to design programming,
Right.
support programming, engage in community organizing or coalition building to actually solve the deep challenges that we have, particularly in the city of Boston. And so, really having some exposure to community organizing when I was an undergrad. I worked for an organization called the Mahoning Valley Organizing Collaborative. And so my senior year of college, when I was studying political science, I was a community organizer. And so that was the same year where community organizing became really sexy because Barack Obama, back in 2008, he was a community organizer. He had studied under the
Yeah.
great Saul Alinsky. And so I was studying community organizing. And so I did that for a while, and it was really beautiful. And so when I came here, I began to really kind of think about what that can look like for me here as a pastor. So I worked as a part-time pastor or a multi-vocational pastor. I was serving at a historic Black Baptist church in Newton, Massachusetts. I was their youth pastor, did that for 7 years, but I had to pay rent in Boston once I graduated. And a part-time youth pastor salary is not going to cut it. And so really my first job, which might be my funnest job to this day, I worked as education director at the Blue Hill Boys and Girls Club in Dorchester, Massachusetts. So I did that for about a year and a half. Then I had a chance to work as community organizer, leading a grant, the Ford Foundation. It was a Pathways grant. And it was at DS9, the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative, which is actually very famous still for some of the work, some of the grassroots organizing that they've done in the city of Boston. I actually heard about them while I was in seminary. So I worked for them for about 2.5 years and met some phenomenal people. I met some great mentors and friends who are my friends to this day, and then went to go lead another grant at United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. I did that for about a year and a half. The work that I did there was supporting young people who are in state subsidized housing, helping them matriculate from high school to college and college to career. And so it was really supporting them, helping them get a post-secondary credential. So did that, and then worked for the Mass Council of Churches, led another grant, the Lilly Foundation, did that for 2 years. And a big part of my job really was to support multi-vocational pastors throughout Massachusetts through a fellowship program that really taught leadership development, particularly aimed at multi-vocational pastors. And then did that for about 2 years and worked for the Boston Foundation, particularly a subdivision of the Boston Foundation called King Boston, which is now called Embrace Boston, and really doing work around reparations and community organizing, really kind of organizing philanthropic organizations to figure out, to help them think about how they use their money in a more equitable way with an emphasis on racial equity and racial justice. And then heard about this great job at Common Cathedral during December of 2021. There was actually a job opening in the alumni newsletter of Boston University School of Theology. And I saw it, I thought, oh, this looks interesting, and didn't pay any attention to it. And then literally when I came off vacation from Christmas, I was in Youngstown, Ohio with my family, and came back, and I was sitting down with my wife, and the first thing that I pulled up on my tab was Common Cathedral, looked at the job description and applied for it, and that's what brought me here.
Good.
Yeah.
So I mean, you just knocked off a bunch of the questions.
Yeah, no
which I
problem.
appreciate. But let's talk about the services and material items that people have. So what do you think, specific to like those services and material items that people need? Like, what do you think they most need to better the situation generally?
Yeah.
I mean, they come to the service obviously for some of those things. So I was
Yeah.
just wondering, like, what specifically do you think is important in terms of services and material items?
Really, our mission is we bridge the divide between the housed and the unhoused persons of Boston. And so, really, what that means is tearing down stereotypes regarding persons who are experiencing homelessness, and creating spaces where there could be the building of relationships. So, we think about building the kingdom or the kingdom of God. It's a place really full of love and justice and equity, where we're not divided because of race, of social economic status, because of us being housed or unhoused. And so, at the core of our program, we really use holistic spiritual programming to kind of bridge that divide, right? The other way, so that's done at a relational level. The other part is we're trying to do that now at a systemic level, meaning answering the question of why a person's homeless in the first place. And what that means is my own critique of capitalism is that capitalism necessitates a certain degree of homelessness. Like it necessitates it because of the way in which our social structures are put in place, the way in which our economy is. You all heard the stories of some of our members, literally because of recession, right? It caused a spiraling effect that caused them to actually lose their house, right? And so this is a lot of members in our community who are experiencing this. And so for us, the type of resources that we need is one is really is money, right? To do the work that we do, it necessitates a certain degree of money to hire staff, but also to ensure that we have adequate, just, and liberative programming to support our community. And so some of the program that we do now is we have a program that happens 4 times a week. We have something called Boston Warm that happens on Monday and Friday. And that's essentially we're open to serve 2 meals to our community, but also for them to have a safe place to be for the morning time. When they wake up in the morning, wherever shelter they might be in, they might even sleep on the street, having a place to come to bathe, having a place to come to eat a good, nutritious meal, but also have a place to come to actually even just sleep in a safe space. We have something that you're here today for, which is called Common Art. We know that art speaks all languages. It bridges across all spaces, races, religious orientations. And so for art is a common way for us to speak the same language. So we have something called Common Art that we do every Wednesday for people to come and just feel human with other individuals. Then Sunday, we have our Sunday morning worship where we literally have been worshiping outside every Sunday. Come snow, whatever it might be, we're outside. We haven't missed a Sunday in 26 years. So we worship outside on the common. And it's beautiful because we have unhoused persons or persons who are experiencing homelessness and house persons. We all come together. There's about 20 to 30 people every Sunday. We eat a common meal together, a beautiful lunch, and then we worship together. And that's a way that we are in community together. But the resources that we're trying to leverage now is that we're developing something called a Healing Institute. And we're naming that healing comes through a couple of different ways. It comes through an internal healing, but we're also naming that our community is experiencing a lot of trauma, chronic trauma, that's being untreated. And so what we're trying to do is enhance the skill of our staff and also our ministry partners to say, like, we can do something about supporting the continued healing of our community. So it's going to happen in 3 forms. So one, the first form is us being able to speak the language of healing. And so thinking about what does trauma-informed care kind of look like? And we're calling it pastoral trauma-informed care, meaning how do we support our pastors and their development as pastors as they're supporting persons who experience habitual or chronic trauma. The other way that we're thinking about healing is through the sharing of story. We're partnering with a great organization that's helping us design spaces for people to come, our unhoused community members to come and really kind of share their story in a beautiful way. Because when you share your story, right, people it's a way for you to kind of get some things off your chest, but it's also a way for people to recognize that you're human just like me. And so creating spaces for people on a weekly basis to come, have a common meal together, and really kind of share their story. The program is called Can We Talk? The other place that we're talking about healing, which really involves everybody, because in order for us to address homelessness in a real and prevalent way, it's not just going to take Common Cathedral. It's not going to just take other unhoused churches or other nonprofits who are dedicated to eradicating homelessness. It's actually going to take a system. It's going to take all of the Commonwealth to really kind of say that this is unjust. It is a right for people to be housed. And so we're engaging in coalition building where we're saying we're supporting the learning, right, of congregations and churches and pastors to help them understand what it means to be unhoused and how they can utilize their resources, how they can utilize their voices to put an end to homelessness in the city of Boston. And so it's kind of a three-pronged approach, really supporting our pastors, supporting the healing of our community members through storytelling, but also supporting churches and community members so they can learn more. There's actually another component. I said three. There's actually four. The last one, and this is a big degree of our population here, people are actually they're trying to figure out how to navigate to their next step. So persons, they're on the street, they're unhoused, they've been chronically unhoused, and they're trying to figure out like how do I get into housing? Right. And oftentimes you might have a social worker, you might have a case manager assigned to you. We have named that we appreciate all of the systems that have been in place to support our unhoused congregation, our unhoused members, but we're saying that I've created a space over the last 26 years where people trust us. Mm-hmm. The unhoused community trusts us to come to us to share their deepest pains, their darkest secrets, the greatest traumas. And so we're saying because they trust us, we should probably put ourselves in a space to kind of help them with that resource navigation, help them getting to their next step towards housing and stability. And so the other part is around something called life coaching. So for you all to matriculate from high school, for example, you got from high school to college, you didn't just wake up and say, I'm going to go to college and apply to the U. There was a couple steps that went in there, and there was probably a principal, a guidance counselor, a parent, a cousin, a big sister that helped you kind of get to your next step to get to housing. We're saying that's the same thing, or your next step to get to college. We're saying that's the same thing that goes with housing. It's actually very difficult. It's a very tedious process to get state subsidized housing. We're saying we want to be in a place to help our community kind of get that. Right. And so that's a long way to kind of answer your question.
How do you think that Common Cathedral, what do you think differentiates Common Cathedral from other communities? And what do you think that you guys do the best that maybe other communities don't do as well?
Yes, you put me on thin ice. Let me say this. So one, Common Cathedral is different because we were the first unhoused church in the country. That wow. Debbie Little, 26 years ago on the Boston Common, literally said there has to be a place for people to worship with persons who are housed and persons who are unhoused. And so we're different in the sense that we can say we were the first, right? And so that's beautiful. I think there's a lot of beautiful unhoused churches across the country. And I think there's a similar mission, a similar desire. I would say we're becoming different in the sense that we're trying to think about how do we scale our programming in a beautiful way. The previous executive director did a really great job of building deep connections with churches to give us the infrastructure to kind of to think deeply. Right. And so I think in some ways we're resourced in a way that allows us to dream a little bit more about how we can support our community. And we're also naming, and this is what Carrington is saying. This is what I'm believing. I do believe that we're called to do two things. We're called to accompany people on their journey of being unhoused. And I think we're also called to eradicate homelessness. And I think Common Cathedral plays a role in that. And so I think I wouldn't say we're different from any other organization, but we're different in the sense that we're naming that as a part of our top priority, that we're called to accompany you as you're experiencing homelessness. And we're also called to eradicate homelessness through our connections with religious institutions.
Right.
I'd like to go back to, you mentioned that trust is a big factor when these people are looking for resources and help and stuff like that. Do you think that's something that's lacking in the current public and government systems in play? And how do you think that could be improved in the future?
Well, I would say just in general, I think many Americans, you look at polls, don't trust government services. Just in general, right. I think there's been a decrease in that across the board. And our members are no different from, everybody else in the community. The other difference is that a lot of times life and death could be contingent upon them getting an access to public benefits. Yeah. And so I think because of that, if people have a mistrust in persons who are sanctioned as government workers, we want to say that there has to be another inroad, another on-ramp to getting you services. And so it can't be that if you don't trust a caseworker or your social worker that you then don't get access to housing. It means that then if we have a trust built with you, we could be a liaison to these government organizations to kind of support you with your housing. And so that's what we're naming. A lot of organizations actually do that in some way. Mm-hmm. And we're saying we're at a point where we think we could do that as well.
Right. That's great.
You're talking about giving these people access and facilitating an environment where they feel comfortable talking about things, and the eventual goal is to eradicate homelessness. But a lot of that, although it is material, there's a lot of you're talking about mental health issues,
Mm-hmm.
and I think some of it might stem from some stigmatization.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted to know, like, what do you see is like one of the bigger misconceptions that people generally have about our local communities? And if you have an opinion, this is more specific to just you and your subjective
Mm-hmm.
opinion, but what do you think would potentially help change the rhetoric that surrounds some of these stigmatizations and problems?
Mm-hmm. Yes, a big question. I think I'm going to go macro before I go to the
That's
micro
fine.
part of your
Yeah.
question. I think our country is born on how we stigmatize people. What's the correct word you use? Stigmatization?
Stigmatization.
Yeah, that's a good SAT word. Yeah, that's a
Yes,
good
sir.
big word.
Good job.
I think our country was founded upon that we literally were founded upon anti-black racism. We were founded upon the genocide of our indigenous brothers and sisters. And so we, as a country, we actually profit off of stigmatizing and othering other people. And so it happens through race, it happens through sexual orientation. In this case, it happens through class, and more particularly how it happens to how we talk about people who are housed and unhoused. And so I think as a whole, that's something as a country we have to come into a cataclysmic confrontation with as a country, to think about, like, we have too many barriers by how we define people as being human. And oftentimes, being human means that you're a cisgendered white male, who has you're in a certain economic bracket that gives you authority, power, and allows you to be human. And we're saying here at Common Cathedral that one part of our motto is all are welcome. All are human, all are beautiful, all are divine beings. And so, part of what we're doing here at Common Cathedral, we're saying, in my particular opinion, that homelessness is actually birthed out of anti-black racism. That we've learned to stigmatize people, we've learned to label people with our eye, with our heart, and even with our money. And so as we tear down barriers around racism, as we tear down barriers around sexual, calling people who are different, othering other people, you're gonna edit this because my language is getting all over the place. Let me say that last part again, so it'd be good for your video. We're at a point now that we're trying to address how we other people. And part of that is learning, and part of that is people really kind of being in contact with one another and being able to name kind of the ways that they have been raised, naming some of the ways that they've been taught, and kind of coming into a realization that sometimes the way we think, the way we act, the way we spend our money, the way we move in the world is unjust and it's unrighteous. And I think because we're a church and a faith-based nonprofit, we're mostly dealing with churches and religious individuals. We actually have a language of talking about that, which is beautiful. Our language is God language. Our language is the language of theology, that we can name and say that a righteous and good and just and perfect God would not want for persons to be unhoused. And to go even deeper, as a Christian organization, we actually often say that the person of Jesus within his own self was actually unhoused. He was born in a lowly manger with animals. That means he was homeless. There's actually a scripture that says, birds have nests and foxes have holes, but the Son of God, Jesus, has nowhere to lay his head. That brother was homeless. You know what I mean? And so how we talk about Jesus is not, people often say Jesus came to serve the poor. We're saying Jesus came and he was poor. He was in house, which is a different way to engage the text. So you have billions of people across the world worshiping this dude named Jesus who was homeless. Right. And we're saying, hey, if Jesus was homeless, and we didn't treat him well, what is God calling us to do for our homeless, our unhoused brothers and sisters today?
Right.
Yeah. So obviously you're a Christian organization, but do you notice that people of like all faiths and dominions like come here to participate in your resources?
Yeah, shout out to Miss Jeannie. So you met Miss Jeannie today, the person who brings lunch to us on Wednesday. She's Jewish.
Right.
Yeah.
We often spend time talking about interfaith dialogue. And so part of our strategy, even moving forward with ministry partners, is thinking about being unhoused. Homelessness in the city of Boston is an issue for all faith traditions. So all faith traditions are called to support and think about how we can eradicate homelessness as a whole.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Great. Let me see.
Do you find that people experiencing homelessness kind of find comfort in religion?
Absolutely. I think I think all persons find comfort in religion.
Right.
We think about the big question that we always are asking ourselves is, how do we love well? How do we deal with relationships, and how do we answer the question of we're going to die? So I think people often, just in general, want to figure out, how can I be loved? How can I show love? How do I deal with the relationships that I have with my brother and sister? And where will I go when I die, if I go anywhere?
Right.
And so I think our unhoused brothers and sisters are having these same questions. But I will say there is something psychological that goes on. There's a certain euphoria that happens when you have a spiritual encounter, when you have some type of divine kind of revelation. And so I think for me, as a person of faith, the deepest connection that you can have was with a higher power, someone that you believe has your life in their hands, someone you believe has something good in store for you. For example, if you have the whole world telling you you are no good, that you're poor, that you're persona non grata, that you are no good to society. You have literally everybody, even maybe your family, telling you that. There's one person, there's one entity, there's one divine being saying, in the midst of all that, you are still loved, you're still divine, you're still the beloved of God. That's important because you have one affirmation that's coming from your higher power to suggest that you are worthy of life here on this planet, even if everything around you says otherwise. And so I think that's why I think the idea of a spiritual connection to God is important. And then also I think we relate to each other on a spiritual basis as well, that we're all divine beings, and us being together, doing religious rituals together, I think affirms that divinity.
Right.
Do you guys want to, like, there's some of the more like personal, subjective questions. Do you have anything else specific to Common Cathedral, or just generally like?
Yeah, I had one more. So you mentioned that a lot of people here have experienced like some level of trauma, and they often come here to kind of like deal and cope with that. I was just wondering if you could like speak from your experience about like the trauma that people come here with, and like the resources they need to deal with it, and how you guys have helped them.
One night on the street is traumatic.
Yeah.
You spend like, what is it, December 28th? It's like maybe 15 degrees outside.
Right.
People are sleeping outside with a coat, with some shoes, some socks, probably not a meal. That's dramatic. You experienced that one night. But imagine you put 100 nights on that, or you put 2 or 3 years on that. That by itself, regardless of anything else, just experiencing the coldness of Boston without any layer of housing protection is traumatic. And so because of that, we're able to treat that by just saying, hey, that's a safe place for you. Our pastors are very skilled. A lot of our pastors have had training around having trauma-informed care. We try to increase that in a great deal. And so I think people are coming to have divine connection. People are coming to feel safe. People are coming to get a fresh pair of socks. People are coming for food. People are coming to get resources to help them get stable. And so there's a layered amount of reasons why people are coming, but I think just experiencing homelessness for any period of time is traumatic within itself. Not being able to provide for yourself materially is traumatic. And that does something to your own. We all have egos. That does something to your ego. That does something to your own self-worth. And so when people come to spend time with us, to even just talk with us, it is our job to affirm them, to affirm their ego, to affirm their own self-worth.
Right.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Perfect. And these are some of the similar questions that I asked him, but I think it's important to ask people these questions.
Yeah.
Is it looking good?
Yeah.
All right. What makes you happy?
You know what makes me? That's a great question. What makes me happy? I think happiness is internal. That happiness should not be predicated, or joy shouldn't be predicated on outside stimuli. But happiness is something that is affirmed within you. It's something that is that you build on a daily basis. I think Aristotle, he had a great word for happiness. I think it was called eudaimonia.
It was eudaimonia.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, it's and eudaimonia actually happens through intentional action on a daily basis. And so for me, I think happiness is rooted in community. This is why it's important for us that we're called Common Cathedral. We're a church where we build our relationships with people. We give people self-worth by placing them in community with one another, and us being present and accompanying them on the journey. But for me, happiness is rooted in having a beautiful relationship with my wife, with my family, and if I'm being honest, doing work that's meaningful and being fairly compensated for it. That's really, I have loved ones, but doing work that is meaningful. And I think in some ways, this is actually, we think about millennials, and you all would be Gen Z. I'm a millennial. You all Gen Z? Yeah. We think about the changing of you're a millennial? You're kind of both. You all in a weird kind of dimension.
Gray area.
Yeah. It depends on the day. Maybe you're a millennial one day and Gen Z the next day. I think when you think about the changing of the workforce, you're actually seeing, like, particularly Gen Z, is you are moving and trying to name happiness and self-care, and I think in a greater way, which is beautiful. You all attributing your happiness to the way that you spend your time. They actually studies to show that you actually will spend as much time, if not more time, working a job than you will be with your family. And so if you're giving half of your life over for your professional life or your adult life to a job, you ought to like that job.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And so that's actually a changing of how people think about life, how people think about work. And so I'm grateful. I feel I have tremendous gratitude to my family, to my mentors, to my wife, to my God, because I've been able to navigate my life in such a way where I can do jobs that are meaningful to me and jobs that I enjoy. And I'm also naming that as a privilege as well, that there was a particular type of privilege I had to be able to go to undergrad, to go to graduate school, meet the appropriate people to kind of put me in a position to be able to do this type of work.
Right. We definitely feel you on that.
Yeah.
You has helped to facilitate
Yeah.
this project for us.
Mhm.
And it's helped us connect to you. So
Absolutely.
we understand and we feel the same
Yeah.
sort of privilege. I think that was a great message, and I think there's a few more questions. I
Mhm.
think one of them, and I really like the question on like what makes you happy, but I also really like this one. It's sort of like whatever your mantra is, but what if you had one message to tell the world, what would it be and why?
Yeah. I always preach, I have a mantra of love and liberation, that we're called to love, and that love should necessitate communal liberation. Malcolm X, he often talks about it's not important for me just to make it out on my own. It's not important. It's not good enough if I make it, if I'm well-to-do, but if my community is still in shambles, that means nothing. And so for me, I have a message or a model of Black liberation, that at the core of what our country needs is to liberate all persons from all forms of oppression, systemic oppression, economic injustice. And I think Black people and Indigenous people are at the center of that. And so that's really my mantra, that I'm called to love well. And to love well means I have to love all of you. It can't just be like, oh, let's hang out as bros every now and then. If you're struggling economically, if you're struggling materially, if you're struggling spiritually, as your brother or your sister, I'm called to support you. This is the great commandment that God has. What is it? To love thy God with all thy heart, thy mind, and thy soul. And what is next to, what's akin to it? To love thy neighbor as thyself. And so that means that there's a certain type of liberation that must be made available to all people. And so that's kind of my mantra, love and liberation.
That's great.
Yeah, man.
Okay, we got a couple more. How much time is on there? I just want to make sure it doesn't stop recording.
Yeah, we're at 22 right now, so.
Yeah.
Alright, we should be good.
If
It
it
stops
lasts-
at 30 for whatever reason.
Okay,
so
yeah,
I just
yeah,
want
yeah.
to make sure it doesn't
Yeah,
like
yeah.
stop the
You
conversation.
can
Absolutely.
always upload the SD card.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
If we have more.
Is there anything that you would like to share about your hopes and aspirations for the future?
Yeah, the hope for Common Cathedral is that you all will share the message of Common Cathedral, that you will go to commoncathedral.org to learn more about us, to learn about our partners, learn about our community, and learn about our staff and the great work that we're doing. But we believe that Common Cathedral is going to really engage in a type of coalition building that will raise awareness around what it means to be unhoused in the city of Boston. Just a personal story. My mother experienced being unhoused. My mother, because of untreated trauma, when I was 5 years old, she had a nervous breakdown, and I was living with my mom and my three sisters. My parents had got divorced when I was 2. My father, he's a preacher and pastor as well in Ohio, and we would hang out with my dad on the weekends, and my mom would have us throughout the week. And my mom, in some ways, she had a difficult childhood, but was doing well, and found herself on hard times, that they were restructuring the job that she worked at. I was trying to figure out how to make it and support 4 children. And so we were watching, you ever saw this movie, you ever heard of Angela Bassett? It's okay. Look her up. Angela Bassett is like, she's like, you've heard of Denzel Washington, right?
Right.
She's like the equivalent of Denzel. She's like just beautiful, like in her heyday. Everyone's, oh my God, Angela Bassett. So anyway, Angela Bassett, she had this really great movie called "What's Love Got to Do with It." It's a movie based upon the life of the great rock and roll artist Tina Turner. And I remember one of my last movies. I was 5 years old. I was watching this movie with my mom. I was 5. I probably should have watched the movie because the movie is kind of inappropriate. But I was watching this movie with my mom, and we had just moved into the house. We were laying on the floor, and I was laying in her lap. Might have been like maybe 40 pounds, and just a little scrawny kid. My mom kissed me, and she had tears in her eyes. And then she ended up literally getting in the car that night when I was 5 and just started driving. And she drove. She left her 4 children. And so think about what type of trauma did you have to go through to like just leave your 4 children. and she ended up in Chicago. My oldest sister at the time, if I was 5, she would have been 15, and we had a little bit of groceries, and we went 3 days without knowing where my mom was at. And then finally, my oldest sister was like, "Yo, we need to call Dad." And my dad, we called my dad. My dad literally had to come move us out of this house that my mom had bought, and I ended up living with my dad. My dad got remarried, and to my stepmom. My stepmom had a child from a previous relationship, and they made my little brother together. And so went from living with my mom, who was the pride and joy of my life, to within 3 months, living with my stepmom and my dad and a new sister and all that kind of jazz.
Yeah.
So I say all that to say, my mom, she moved to Chicago. She was dealing with trauma, and she was unhoused for a good amount of time until she got the support she needed, and she got back on her feet and made a good career of herself. Had a good career in Chicago, and because she still had untreated trauma, she actually developed something called Pick's disease, which is like a form of Alzheimer's. She actually developed it when she was maybe 54, and she actually got diagnosed when I was a junior. What year are you all? I was a junior in college, an undergrad. And from 21 to 32, I watched my mom literally lose her mind, lose her memory, and she died. And it all began with untreated mental health problems. And so when I see people who come through Common Cathedral who are struggling with mental health, who are struggling with trauma, who are struggling with being unhoused, I think about my mom.
Yeah.
And so what I'm doing, the scripture says, what you do unto the least of these you do unto me. In my mind, I reverse that scripture. What I do to the person at Common Cathedral, I'm doing it unto my mother.
Right.
And so for me, it's important for us to have the best programming, the best staff, the best opportunities, the best resources for our community, because this could have been my mother some 20, 30 years ago.
So that experience during your childhood kind of inspired you to do what you do now?
It's inspired me not just to do the work that I do now, but it's inspired me for the way I live my life.
Right.
And so whether if it's in this job or how I treat my wife or how I treat my friends and my family, I'm thinking of them in the same way that I would want to think about my mom and how I should treat them. So yeah, that's a beautiful comment, a great question.
Right. Thank you for sharing that.
Absolutely, man.
Check the time real quick.
We're at 27. So
All right. Yeah, so we can finish off this last one.
No problem.
2 minutes, we got it.
Yeah.
This is just a wrap up. Is there anything else you'd like to share about your experiences with people experiencing homelessness or just Common Cathedral in general to the viewers?
Yeah, I would say this. I used to have this great professor at Boston University School of Theology. His name was Walter Fluker, and he was really strange, beautiful. He'd walk up to you, he'd be like, "Are you awake?" Literally, that's what he would say to you. It was really weird. And so the first time I heard him say that, I was 23. I was my first year seminary. I was like, "Do I have crud in my eye or something?" Like, "Yeah, I'm awake." And what he meant by that was, "Are you awake to what's going on in the world?" And sometimes capitalism, sometimes our culture can blind you and tell you to seek after money, seek after fame and opportunity. Cornel West, he talks about seeking after the superficial spectacle of life, right? In some ways, I mean, it pays off. It's great. It's beautiful. You have a great life and you have great cars and maybe hopefully you get married and have great children. But to give your life just for yourself, to work to amass status and power and money, those things are fleeting. Those things don't really kind of give you the type of satisfaction that your soul, whatever you might call that, longs for. But thinking about doing something that is worthwhile is doing something for your community, doing something for your family, doing something that sparks revolution and liberation and love and justice in the world. I would say that's the last thing I would share, that when I was a junior, I was answering these big questions about what to do with my life, what to do with my talent, what to do with my resources and my time. And because I sought after things that were satisfying to the soul, I was able to build a good life for myself that I can be proud of. And that's what my hope for you all, and hope for persons who might watch this.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right.